Do you remember the dashboard design that I completely failed at in the last video? The one where I spent hours creating something that looked like a landing page when it was supposed to be a dashboard? Well, I'm back, and this time we're actually finishing it plus a couple other screens. Because sometimes your biggest breakthrough comes right after your worst failures. Hi everyone, I'm Cecilia and welcome to part 2 of designing Subscription Monster. If you haven't watched part 1, basically, I tried designing a new dashboard for my fiancé Christian's new app and it went pretty terribly. I went down this whole cowboy themed rabbit hole with warm tone colors and it ended up looking like a cardboard construction paper landing page than an actual functioning dashboard. But I think that's the thing about design. Every failed iteration teaches you something crucial. In my case, I learned that dashboards need clarity over personality and function over flashiness. Also, full disclaimer, this is not a Figma tutorial because there's tons of those out there. This video is about my thought process, the why behind my decisions, and showing you that after even years of designing, we still mess up, restart, and figure it out as we go. So Christian's been coding up Subscription Monster while I get started on the designs. And for context, this is an app to help businesses track their subscriptions. Think Rocket Money, but for companies and not for personal use. He has a lot of videos on his YouTube channel covering more of the engineering aspects of it and some of the branding. But after my last video with the disaster of a first attempt at designing the dashboard, we knew we needed a different approach. So let's get started. Alright, so let's dive into the Figma. So let me give you a super quick recap on part 1 of this design process. We started with this UX screen and I wanted to try to go for a warm tone cowboy vibe, but it doesn't work that well since I tried making it look more like a landing page when I'm actually designing for a dashboard. Then I tried dark mode to make it look more futuristic and trustworthy after talking to Christian more about the vision that he had for Subscription Monster, and this is where we ended up. Last but not least, this next screen is the design that Christian got after he was vibe coding this, so for today's video, let's start from here. Alright, so the first thing I realized was that I needed to make this look good before I started experimenting with it. So I went on Mobbin to look at some dashboard design inspiration. Also, a huge shout out to Mobbin because they're sponsoring today's video. If you've literally seen any of my other videos, you know that I use them every single day for my design process, so definitely feel free to check them out. I've got a 20% off link in the description below, and I promise you, you will definitely use them in your design process. So basically, Mobbin curates all of these screens for a bunch of products on web and mobile, and in my case, I wanted to look specifically at web dashboards to see industry standards. If you actually go on the saved page, Christian created a collection of dashboards that he liked, so I was able to go on here and pull a lot of great inspiration for the screen. I consolidated a lot of them into my Figma to see the industry standards, what other companies are doing, and how they lay out the information, just to get a sense of what is user expected in terms of UX and dashboards. That's why I created this first screen, and I stripped away all of the colors and made it extremely basic. It's still pretty similar to how I laid out the content for the dark mode screen, but after talking to Christian and getting some feedback, we decided to add color to the overview numbers to signify positive and negative, and also made this category section a graph so that it's easier for the user to visualize. I also changed up the font for the numbers because Christian didn't like the original one that I used, and I ultimately ended up with Rubik. I tried the other ones up here, but this one fit the screen the best. I actually just went on Google and looked up some popular number fonts in this article and found the one that I ended up using. Alright, so in this next screen, I was having trouble with this new transactions box, and it felt too text heavy, so I added some icons signified by these placeholder gray boxes here, and this was all of the feedback that I got from Christian at the time, and my ultimate main goal was to have all of this information easily digestible for the user. I just wanted it to be a little bit easier to read while also having a little bit more branding involved, since this is basically just a white screen with some plain text. At this point, Christian and I looked up some more inspiration, and we currently use a web browser called Dia, and they have some really good UI and branding, so we went on their website to see how they use cards and lay out their imagery and information hierarchy. I took some screenshots and put them in Figma for easy access, and this next screen is just me trying to emulate Dia just to have a starting point. Remember that it's okay to copy in the beginning as long as you just use it for inspiration and then make it your own afterwards. We have these white cards with a shadow just like this Dia page here, and I broke up the information a little bit differently so that it's a lot more scannable. I also tried adding a gradient to the top left, and it's super subtle. You can see the radial gradient here, but once we preview this, I added the shadow because I made it a glass effect, and you can see how the frosted glass background can be shown as the colors are peeking through. The glass effect is a new beta feature on Figma, and I wanted to try it out, and it's in the effects panel, and you can definitely play around with the variables here. I tried some more exploration with colors for the graph and ended up with the first color palette since it matched the rest of the colors well. All these screenshots are from Pinterest, and it's a great place to start if you're looking for some color inspiration. In this next iteration, I changed those colors to gradients because I wanted a little bit more variety instead of flat colors, but I didn't really like it. However, I did end up stopping at this point because I felt like I was spending too much time on it, and I knew I'd come back to it later. I decided to move away from this darker gray and chose this brighter, fresher blue color. Next up, I looked up some more gradient patterns, so you can definitely see the inspiration from these colors. I tried using this Figma plugin called Generative Gradients for some more dynamic color colors and grain, but again, in practice, it was a lot more distracting than I needed for dashboard purposes. I got some more feedback from Christian, and we realized that we needed to make the screen look more realistic so that we get a better idea of what it would actually look like. So I spent some time changing all of the data to be real and using real images and icons. So I found these images from the Icons 8 plugin from here, and they always have some really cool images that you can look through. Also, again, all of these icons also here that I played with are from the Iconify plugin, and you can just search for any icon that you want, and they always have a bunch of options. Down at the bottom as well, we were talking about it, and we decided to only show the top 5 subscriptions just as an overview, since this is just a dashboard. Last but not least, I changed the main buttons to be less aggressive because I felt like it was a bit too distracting when it was a dark heavy purple, so I made it more secondary button-like. You can also see that we changed up the information a little bit. Christian and I went back and forth, and ultimately at this time decided that this was the information that was needed for the user. In this next screen, we actually wanted to use the subscription monster mascot Oliver instead of some random placeholder images, so I went on ChatGPT and generated these images based off of our logo here. I tried a flat version and also a 3D version, and we ended up going with the flatter version, as you can see in this screen. At this point, we looked at the screen and we wanted to make sure that this information was useful for the user as a dashboard. I know I keep reiterating this, but it's always important to keep the user in mind. We decided to change up how the information was displayed and only show what's necessary because the last 2 cards seemed really redundant in this screen, so we got rid of that, combined them into one, and made the overview card a lot bigger, since these numbers are very important. Last but not least, we did try this flat version of the cards just to see what it would look like, but we liked this version more because it has more personality. And again, it's important to reiterate that I'm constantly getting feedback from Christian to make sure that I'm on the right path. Also, having another set of eyes on your designs is super helpful when you've just been staring at your design for so long to get some fresh perspective and understand what works and what doesn't. I like how we started out with a lot of information and we're just chipping away at it to perfect it and not overload the user with too much information. At this point, I wanted to see if I can find any more inspiration on dashboards and try another direction just in case I find something. So I went on Dribbble this time because Dribbble is known more for their flashy designs, and I looked up dashboards, took screenshots of some that stood out to me, and consolidated them into my Figma. I also went pen to paper for this part and tried to get my thoughts out on paper just to see what it would look like. Sometimes it just helps to draw it out to get the ball rolling on ideas. And here is my desktop version. I really followed this screenshot for the color palette, as well as this glass effect here, and also the way that this screenshot has these 4 cards, with the first card being a darker color. You can see the similarities in this screen that I changed up, and again, I made all of these cards into the glass effect down here. I made the monthly average card the darkest because that is the main information that I think is the most important to the user, since the goal while using this app is for a business to decrease this monthly average number of your subscriptions cost. Also, this glass effect is how you get that slight purple edge for these cards. So I showed this to Christian just to get more feedback, and he said it's great at first glance, but it might get a little bit old when you're looking at this all the time in terms of the glass effect. So instead of having a lot of depth for it, we wanted to get rid of this purple effect. So I made these glass cards look thicker with no depth, so you can see that it looks a lot cleaner here. So that was the ultimate feedback for this screen. You want to make sure nothing is too distracting for the user so that everything is clean while still keeping that bit of personality. His other piece of feedback was to change up the top nav because it didn't really match the rest of the screen, especially when you scroll. So let's preview this page, and yeah, the top nav does get a little bit distracting, so I worked on that next. My solution ended up being this one, and this top nav is taking inspiration from this one. So this does not stay sticky at the top and is a lot simpler and less distracting, since the information in the dashboard is the most important. I added some text here to add a little bit of more personalization and friendliness, and the category graph here is also inspiration taken from this screenshot down here. I felt like this was a lot easier for the user to understand. And last but not least, I put the subscriptions in a box, again to match the other cards up top. So these are our final screens. You can see I ended up changing the background color again to the same fresh, brighter, bluer color. If we change the Figma background to like white or gray, you can see that it is actually blue. And let's see this as a preview, and it's looking pretty good. So this is where we ended up. I made another version where instead of a glass effect, these cards are just white, because we do like this version the most, but we have a feeling that it might not look as good in production. So I made this white card version just in case. And now that we have these screens finalized, I use this dashboard screen to be the base for our next screen, which is the subscription screen. Alright, so let's get started on the next screen. So from this dashboard screen, I'm starting the design for the subscription screen, which is a place for the user to view all of your subscriptions for the month. This is the original screen here that Christian had vibe coded with the information that we need to include. He did say that he purposely put the filters on the right with the overview on top of that, with all of his subscriptions on the left as a list view, which you can toggle to the calendar. But this was a screen that I had to keep in mind for all of the information. So I experimented with different ways to show this information, especially the filters. And this screenshot from Robin, I liked how the side map here could be collapsible with icons for you to choose from. So this could have been stuff like showing your filters, showing a sort by, and showing whether it's a list or calendar. I also tried a version where you can just see all of your filters above the subscriptions list. And as I continue to work on this idea, I realized that it doesn't work very well and it can get quite bulky, especially with the filters at the top or on the side. Also, if it's a sidebar like this image here, it might not be very clear on what the user is looking at in terms of the icons. And I also wanted the filters to be easily accessible to the user instead of having them to click around and see the filters. So ultimately, the original UX that Christian had on his original screen was the best option, and we stuck with that UX. With that in mind, we moved on to the next screen. Here I just finalized the view and made it look more like our dashboard with our color palette and our cards. Here I added that toggle for the list and calendar view, centered the month where you can traverse between each month, and added the overview card and the filters to the right for easy access for the user. You can see up here I've just created these components and also was looking for some appropriate icons, and then I also ended up getting rid of the glow from here, because it did look a little bit outdated when I added it, and I liked the flatter look of the toggle. Next, after talking to Christian and getting some more feedback, I got rid of this purple and made it white because we felt like the purple was not adding anything to the screen and was more distracting than anything else. And then for the list, we made the logos a lot smaller and the data a lot more scannable. And you can see in my notes here that the list data will change and the columns can be customizable in the future as a future feature, but what's more important is what information shows when the user clicks on the row. So ultimately, this is the final subscription screen. Let's just have a look in the preview, and it is looking good. Of course, designing the screen went a lot faster since we already had the design finalized for the main dashboard screen. We just have to make sure everything is in the same design language, so it's just matching from here and making sure the UX looks good. With that in mind, the last screen that I designed was the calendar view of the same page. Since calendars are its completely own UX component, I went back to Mobbin to look at some other examples of other products that use calendars and got some great examples here. I liked how a lot of these were easier to scan, with lots of padding and very minimalistic, and I also like this last one down here and how they show icons for the product. It's also important to keep in mind that I designed the top bar area for the subscriptions list to be usable with the calendar view as well, which is why I took it out of the card so it can be used for both views. Same thing as why I put this filter by text header out of the card to keep that same design pattern. So this screenshot is actually what Christian originally had when he was vibe coding. He ultimately did not like how it bulky and complicated everything looked, so he wanted me to take a stab at it. So first frame here is what I ended up with for a single day cell in the calendar. With these shadows and icons, you can tell that I took inspiration from the simplicity of this, the shadows of this, and the icons of this. So if we go back to our cells, you can see me just playing around with a bunch of different options, and ultimately I ended up with this component. I went ahead and made this days cell into a component because I knew if I made one change, I would have all of the boxes to change, and I didn't want to do that manually. Normally, I would create components for everything at the beginning of a project because that saves a lot of headache down the line when you want to change an aspect for one thing and you have to go through all of the screens. But right now, since we're rapidly designing and exploring, I didn't want to take the time to do that currently, even though I know that I should have done that. So basically, this is the first component for Subscription Monster. We have a variant for the current date and another variant for an empty cell. We also got rid of the word charged because we thought that would be way too repetitive in a calendar. So down here, I made a full calendar and fixed up the corner radiuses when appropriate and added a little bit here for more of a design flair. Once I added that to the actual screen, I made the data look more realistic instead of having everything look the same like here, and I think it's looking pretty good. I also tried a version on the right where the header is in the card, but it made the screen look a lot more busy and it would not work well with the list view because I wanted to seamlessly flow with the list view and the calendar view. So the actual final screen is this one. Let's view this in the preview, and here's the final screen. So these are our final 3 screens. We have a lot left to work on for the product, but I think we have a very good starting point and a design language for Subscription Monster. And one more thing, we really want to use animation and interaction design to differentiate this product from others. We want to make sure we don't have just static screens, but something that feels alive when you use it. So that's something that is obviously not reflected in these Figma screens, but hopefully will help Subscription Monster look and feel even better. Okay, so let me pull back from the screens for a second and share what this whole process taught me, because honestly, these lessons completely changed how I approach design. Lesson 1. Start ugly and refine later. I spent way too much time in part 1 trying to make things perfect from the start, but you can see at the beginning of this video, I literally stripped everything back to the basics. No colors, no fancy effects, just raw information hierarchy, and that's when things finally clicked. Your first version should be more about structure and not aesthetics. Lesson 2. Feedback loops save lives and designs. Every single screen on here had Christian's feedback on it. Having someone say that this feels too heavy or this information doesn't make sense, that's gold. You definitely need that throughout the process to make sure that you're on the right path. Find someone who will be honest with you, because at the end of the day, your designs will thank you. Lesson 3. Copy first and innovate second. Do you remember when I literally copied Dia's card structure? There's no shame in that. Use existing patterns as your foundation, then make them your own. I started with their cards and ended up with something completely different, but still structurally sound. Lesson 4. Preview constantly. My biggest mistake in part 1 was not previewing enough. It's wild how designs look very different when you're zoomed out or zoomed in while designing versus what they actually look like on the screen. Now I preview after every major change. It takes 2 seconds and it saves hours of wrong direction. Lesson 5. Components are your future self's best friend. I know I said I didn't make a lot of components because we were moving fast, but making that calendar date component into a component saved me so much time. Even during rapid prototyping, just take the 30 seconds to turn it into a component, and I know I should take my own advice. Lesson 6. Less is actually more, especially for dashboards. We went from showing everything to only showing what matters. Users don't need all of the data all of the time. They just need the right data at the right time. Even with that overview section, we cut it by 40% and it became 100% more useful. And finally, lesson 7. Sometimes design systems emerge and they're not planned. We didn't sit down and plan on a design system from day one. It emerged from solving one screen very well. Once we nailed the dashboard, the rest of the screens basically designed themselves. The patterns, the spacing, the styles, it all just ended up flowing. We only had to worry about the UX. So there you have it. From complete disaster to 3 finalized screens with a coherent design language. The truth is, this is what real design looks like. It's not all the highlight reels on Dribbble, and not the perfect case studies and portfolios. It's full of messy iterations, constant feedback, and sometimes completely starting over, and that's okay. Actually, it's more than okay because it's completely necessary. If you're watching this feeling scared to start designing or opening up Figma, that's a good thing because it means you're taking it seriously. But don't let that stop you. Open up Figma, make something terrible, get feedback, make it better, and repeat. Every designer that you admire has screens that they're embarrassed by and folders full of abandoned iterations. Even designs that make them question if they're even good at this, the only difference is that they kept going. If you've learned anything from this process, feel free to leave a comment. And if you have any feedback on the designs, also please feel free to share it since we're still iterating. Also, let me know if you like this type of content. I'm not sure if this is helpful for anyone, but hopefully my thought process might be insightful for you. Thanks for watching, and remember, your worst design is just your first iteration of your best design. I'll see you in the next one.